The Galactic Council of Zephyria had ruled over 14 star systems for over 3 millennia. Their crystalline towers stretched into the purple skies of their homeworld, monuments to their absolute authority over lesser species. The Council believed themselves to be the apex of evolution, the perfect blend of intelligence and technological advancement that made them natural rulers of the galaxy. Commander Vextar stood before the massive holographic display in the council chambers, his 6 arms gesturing elegantly as he presented his findings. The other council members, their translucent blue skin shimmering under the artificial starlight, listened with the kind of detached interest they reserved for discussing pest control. Honored Council, Vextar's voice resonated through the chamber with harmonic undertones. Our long-range scouts have discovered a new species in the Outer Rim territories. They call themselves humans and inhabit a small blue planet in what they term the Sol System. Council Elder ZYX Era leaned forward, her ancient face bearing the wisdom scars traditional to their species. What classification do you assign them, Commander? Preliminary analysis suggests Class 7 intelligence, barely above the threshold for recognition. They possess rudimentary spaceflight capabilities, having only recently achieved travel to their neighboring celestial bodies. Their technology is primitive by our standards, relying heavily on chemical propulsion and basic nuclear energy. A ripple of amused harmonic laughter echoed through the chamber. The Zephyrians had mastered quantum manipulation and dimensional folding eons ago. To them, human technology seemed like children playing with fire sticks. Their social structure is chaotic, Vextar continued, manipulating the hologram to show Earth's surface. Multiple competing nation-states, constant warfare over resources, and they haven't even achieved planetary unity. Most disturbing, they seem incapable of controlling their emotions, letting feelings override logical decision-making. Elder Mordun, whose crystalline implants marked him as the Council's chief strategist, spoke with the cold precision of a calculating machine. Have they detected our observation probes? Negative, Elder. Their detection capabilities are centuries behind our stealth technology. We could study them for millennia without discovery. Vextar paused, accessing additional data streams through his neural interface. However, there are some unusual characteristics worth noting. The council chamber fell silent. Unusual characteristics in primitive species often indicated either valuable resources or potential threats that required immediate attention. Elaborate, Commander. Their adaptability quotient is off our established scales. In just the past century, they've advanced from basic mechanical flight to landing on their moon. Their rate of technological advancement appears exponential rather than linear. Additionally, their response to existential threats shows concerning patterns. Vextar manipulated the display to show archived footage of human conflicts. Images of soldiers charging through artillery fire, civilians forming human chains to save strangers from burning buildings, and rescue workers diving into dangerous situations filled the holographic space. They display what can only be classified as irrational self-sacrifice behaviors. Individuals will risk or forfeit their lives for others with no genetic connection or resource exchange. This suggests a fundamental flaw in their survival programming. Elder ZYX Sarah's expression shifted to one of mild curiosity. In Zephyrian society, every action was calculated for maximum benefit to the individual and the collective. The concept of purposeless sacrifice was not only foreign but seemed evolutionarily impossible. Most peculiar, she mused. What do you recommend, Commander? Vextar straightened, his proposal carefully prepared. I suggest we implement Protocol 7. We establish controlled contact, assess their value as potential servants or resources, and integrate them into our sphere of influence before they develop beyond containment. Protocol 7 was the standard procedure for newly discovered species. It involved a series of escalating tests designed to evaluate intelligence, compliance, and potential usefulness. Species that passed became tributary worlds, providing resources and labor. Those that failed were either relocated to preserve galactic stability or, in extreme cases, eliminated. The process will be simple, Vextar explained as the hologram shifted to show a tactical overview. We begin with subtle interference, testing their response to external pressure. Economic disruption, natural disaster simulation, perhaps some social manipulation. If they prove tractable, we move to open contact and integration. If they resist beyond acceptable parameters. He left the sentence hanging. Every council member understood the implications. Elder Mordaunt accessed his personal data streams, reviewing historical precedents. How long do you estimate for complete evaluation? Standard Protocol 7 takes approximately 50 of their local years. However, given their primitive technology and social chaos, I anticipate successful integration within 20 years. Possibly fewer if they prove as emotionally unstable as initial observations suggest. The vote was unanimous. The Zephyrians had never encountered a species that could resist their advanced technology and psychological manipulation techniques. Humans would be no different. 3 months later, the first phase began. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the control room of the International Space Monitoring Station, her eyes fixed on the anomalous readings flooding her screens. As the facility's chief analyst, she'd seen her share of unusual cosmic phenomena, but this was different. The patterns were too regular, too purposeful to be natural. "Tom, are you seeing this?" she called to her colleague across the room. Dr. Thomas Anderson hurried over, his coffee mug forgotten as he studied the data. "Those are definitely artificial signals. The mathematics are too complex for random cosmic radiation." The signals had been appearing with increasing frequency over the past week. Each transmission lasted exactly 17 minutes and 43 seconds, followed by a silence period of exactly twice that duration. The mathematical precision was unmistakable. "We need to report this to the Global Monitoring Network," Sarah said, already reaching for the secure communication line. What Sarah and Tom didn't know was that they were observing the initial phase of the Zephyrian testing protocol. High-altitude atmospheric processors were beginning to subtly alter Earth's weather patterns, while quantum manipulators created the electromagnetic signatures they were detecting. Across the planet, other unusual events were beginning to manifest. Stock markets experienced inexplicable fluctuations that followed no recognizable economic patterns. Satellite communication networks suffered intermittent failures that technicians couldn't explain. GPS systems occasionally provided coordinates that were off by exactly 2.7 kilometers, always in a southeastern direction. The Zephyrians monitored human responses with clinical detachment. Vextar watched from his command ship, positioned just beyond the asteroid belt where human detection was impossible. His preliminary reports to the Council were encouraging. Subjects show expected confusion and mild distress, he transmitted. No coordinated response detected. Individual governments are investigating independently, suggesting their fractured social structure prevents effective information sharing. However, Vextar failed to notice several crucial details that would later prove significant. While governments struggled with bureaucratic delays, individual humans were already beginning to connect the dots. Amateur radio operators compared notes about the signal patterns. Independent researchers shared data through global computer networks. Most importantly, small groups of humans were displaying the same irrational cooperation behaviors that had puzzled the Zephyrians. Dr. Chen found herself working 18-hour days, not because any authority demanded it, but because she felt compelled to solve the mystery. When her equipment proved inadequate, she contacted researchers in other countries, sharing her findings freely despite no promise of recognition or reward. "The signals are definitely extrasolar in origin," she explained during an encrypted video conference with scientists from 12 different nations. "But they're not random. There's an underlying mathematical structure that suggests intentional communication or technological process." In Moscow, Dr. Yuki Petrov had reached similar conclusions through independent analysis. "My calculations show these atmospheric anomalies are artificially induced. The energy requirements would be enormous, far beyond anything we could generate." In Lagos, Professor James Okafor had discovered the GPS coordinate patterns. "The displacement is too precise to be natural error. Someone or something is testing our navigation systems." The global scientific community was responding exactly as humans always did when faced with a mystery, by working together with passionate intensity, sharing resources and information without concern for personal gain. To the Zephyrians, this behavior remained incomprehensible. Vextar decided to escalate to Phase 2 of the protocol. The earthquake struck without warning at 3:47 a.m. local time, its epicenter directly beneath the city of Denver, Colorado. What made it particularly unusual was not its magnitude, a respectable 6.8 on the Richter scale, but its characteristics. The seismic patterns were unlike anything in geological records. Emergency response teams mobilized with practiced efficiency, but they quickly noticed something extraordinary. The earthquake had occurred in a region with no significant fault lines, and the seismic waves showed mathematical patterns that suggested artificial generation. More troubling were the secondary effects. Electronic systems throughout the city began experiencing coordinated failures. Traffic control systems defaulted to specific patterns that created maximum congestion. Communication networks routed calls through unnecessarily complex pathways, creating delays and crossed signals. Dr. Marcus Webb, a seismologist at the University of Colorado, was among the first to recognize the artificial nature of the event. His preliminary analysis showed that the earthquake's characteristics were physically impossible for natural tectonic activity. This wasn't a natural earthquake, he announced during an emergency scientific briefing. The wave patterns suggest a controlled energy release, probably generated by technology we don't understand. The federal government's response was predictably slow and compartmentalized. Various agencies launched separate investigations, each protecting their jurisdiction and classified information. But, while bureaucracies fumbled, ordinary citizens were already taking action. Within hours of the earthquake, amateur radio networks had established communication links between affected areas. Volunteer groups organized rescue operations without waiting for official coordination. Most remarkably, people began sharing resources freely, opening their homes to strangers and distributing food and water without expectation of payment. Vextar observed these behaviors with growing puzzlement. According to Zephyrian understanding of evolutionary psychology, stressed populations should become more territorial and resource protective, not more cooperative. Yet humans seem to be doing the opposite. Their behavior defies logical explanation, he reported to the council. Faced with resource scarcity and infrastructure failure, they are actively reducing their individual survival advantages by sharing with non-genetic group members. The council's response was dismissive. Primitive species often display irrational behaviors under stress. Continue the protocol. Their emotional instability will work in our favor. But Vextar was beginning to have doubts. His extensive experience with dozens of species had taught him to recognize patterns, and the patterns emerging from human behavior were unlike anything in the Zephyrian databases. The third phase of testing would prove even more revealing. The global economic disruption began subtly, with what appeared to be random fluctuations in commodity prices. Agricultural futures spiked and crashed without apparent cause. Energy markets experienced volatility that followed no recognizable patterns. Currency exchange rates shifted according to mathematical sequences that human economists couldn't explain. Within weeks, the effects cascaded through interconnected global markets. Food prices became unpredictable, making it impossible for families to budget for basic necessities. Transportation costs fluctuated so wildly that supply chains began breaking down. Unemployment rose as businesses couldn't plan for their operating costs. The Zephyrians had employed this technique successfully on 47 other species. Economic instability typically led to social breakdown, making populations more receptive to the order and stability that galactic integration provided. Fear and desperation made beings compliant. Humans, however, responded differently. Instead of hoarding resources and protecting their individual interests, communities began organizing mutual aid networks. When grocery stores couldn't maintain stable prices, neighborhood groups pooled their resources to buy directly from farmers. When transportation became unreliable, people organized car-sharing networks and walking groups. Most surprisingly, as traditional economic structures became unstable, humans began creating entirely new systems of resource distribution. Time banks emerged where people traded hours of labor rather than currency. Skill-sharing networks connected individuals who could teach each other everything from basic auto repair to advanced computer programming. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, an economist at Harvard University, found herself studying these emergent systems with growing excitement rather than fear. We're witnessing the birth of post-monetary economic structures, she explained during a live-streamed lecture that attracted millions of viewers worldwide. When traditional markets fail, humans naturally revert to cooperation-based resource sharing. It's actually more efficient than competitive capitalism for community-level resource allocation. The lecture was translated into dozens of languages and sparked similar movements in countries around the world. Rather than causing social breakdown, the economic disruption was accelerating innovation and cooperation. Vexstar watched these developments with increasing concern. According to every model in the Zephyrian databases, the human species should be approaching complete social collapse. Instead, they seem to be evolving more sophisticated organizational structures in real time. The subjects are not responding according to established behavioral parameters, he reported to the council. Economic pressure is producing increased cooperation rather than the expected resource competition. Elder Mordun's response carried a note of impatience. Perhaps you have underestimated the required pressure threshold. Initiate Phase 4. Phase 4 was designed to test military capabilities and social cohesion under direct threat. It involved the deployment of gravitational manipulation technology to simulate asteroid impacts in unpopulated areas, creating visible demonstrations of overwhelming force. The first demonstration occurred in the Australian outback, where a precisely controlled gravitational pulse created a crater exactly 2.3 kilometers in diameter. The event was impossible to miss, as it generated seismic waves detectable across the entire continent and electromagnetic pulses that disrupted satellite communications for several hours. The second demonstration took place in the Sahara Desert, followed by similar displays in the Canadian tundra and the Siberian wilderness. Each impact was carefully calculated to be visible to human monitoring systems while avoiding populated areas. The message was clear: an unknown force possessed weapons of incredible destructive power and was demonstrating its capability to use them. The global response was swift but not what the Zephyrians expected. Rather than fragmenting into competing factions seeking to protect themselves, human governments began unprecedented levels of cooperation. The United Nations convened emergency sessions that produced actual agreements rather than empty resolutions. Military leaders from rival nations shared intelligence and coordinated analysis efforts. More significantly, the scientific community mobilized with the same intensity they had shown during their greatest historical challenges. Research facilities that had been competitors began sharing data freely. University networks organized around-the-clock analysis teams. Independent researchers contributed processing power from personal computers to create distributed analysis networks. Dr. Chen found herself coordinating with researchers across 6 continents, analyzing the gravitational anomalies in detail that would have been impossible for any single institution. The energy patterns are definitely artificial, she announced during a global scientific conference conducted through secure video links. But, more importantly, they're designed for demonstration rather than destruction. These aren't attacks, they're messages. The revelation sparked intense debate about appropriate responses. Some governments advocated for military preparation and defensive measures. But a growing coalition of scientists, diplomats, and ordinary citizens argued for a different approach. If they wanted to destroy us, they could have done it already, argued Dr. Petrov during a televised debate. The fact that they're demonstrating power without causing casualties suggests they want something other than our elimination. The human response was culminating in something the Zephyrians had never encountered, a species that responded to demonstrations of superior force by becoming more unified rather than more submissive. Vexstar's final report from Phase 4 carried a note of urgency that his previous communications had lacked. The subjects are not responding according to any established pattern. Rather than producing compliance through intimidation, our demonstrations have accelerated their technological development and social cooperation. Their scientists are reverse engineering our gravitational manipulation techniques with disturbing speed. The Council's response was immediate and decisive. Initiate direct contact protocol, Elder ZYXera commanded. We will assess their compliance through face-to-face negotiation. If they prove intractable, we proceed to elimination protocols. Vexstar acknowledged the order but found himself experiencing something unprecedented in his long military career. For the first time in over 2 centuries of conquest and integration, he wasn't entirely confident in the outcome. The humans had already proven themselves capable of responses that defied every model in the Zephyrian databases. As he prepared for direct contact, Vextar couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to encounter something far more dangerous than a primitive species ripe for conquest. He was about to meet humanity at its most focused and determined, and he had no idea what that truly meant. Couldn't survive. The Zephyrian command ship materialized in Earth's orbit exactly at noon Greenwich Mean Time, its arrival timed for maximum global visibility. The massive vessel, stretching nearly 10 kilometers in length, appeared as a shimmering distortion in space before its stealth systems deactivated, revealing crystalline surfaces that reflected Earth's sunlight in prismatic patterns that painted rainbows across the upper atmosphere. Every telescope, every satellite, every amateur astronomer with binoculars witnessed the moment that changed everything. Within minutes, the image was broadcast across every communication network on the planet. Humanity's first confirmed contact with extraterrestrial intelligence was no longer a question of if but, a reality demanding immediate response. Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of his ship, reviewing the careful choreography that the Council had designed for first contact. The protocol was refined through centuries of successful implementation across dozens of species. Begin with an impressive display of technological superiority, establish communication through mathematical concepts, demonstrate overwhelming military capability, then offer integration into the galactic community under Zephyrian guidance. It had never failed. "Communications array ready, Commander," reported his tactical officer. "We are prepared to transmit on all human communication frequencies simultaneously. Initiate contact." The message that reached Earth was elegant in its simplicity. Mathematical equations that proved the sender's intelligence, followed by pictographic representations of the solar system that demonstrated their knowledge of human astronomy. Then came the key element, a clear diagram showing a Zephyrian delegation requesting permission to land at a location of humanity's choosing. The global response was immediate chaos, but not the kind the Zephyrians expected. In the United Nations building in New York, an emergency session convened within hours. Representatives from every nation debated not whether to respond, but how to respond most effectively. The discussions were passionate but remarkably free of the territorial disputes that usually characterized international relations. "We need a unified response," declared Secretary General Maria Santos. "Whatever their intentions, we must speak with one voice." Similar conversations were taking place in every capital city, but also in research institutions, amateur radio clubs, online forums, and coffee shops around the world. Humanity was experiencing something unprecedented, a global conversation about their collective future. Dr. Chen found herself appointed as part of the International Scientific Committee tasked with analyzing the alien communication. Working alongside researchers from every continent, she felt a sense of purpose that transcended national boundaries or personal ambition. "The mathematics are incredibly sophisticated," she explained during one of the marathon analysis sessions. "But they're using concepts we understand. This suggests they want meaningful communication, not just to demonstrate superiority." The decision about where to receive the alien delegation sparked intense debate. Every major power wanted the honor of hosting first contact, but the scientific community proposed something different. "Neutral territory," suggested Dr. Petrov during a video conference that included the world's leading linguists, physicists, and diplomats. "Somewhere that belongs to all of humanity, not any single nation." The International Space Station was proposed, then dismissed as too small and vulnerable. Antarctica's research stations were considered, but access would be too limited. Finally, someone suggested the obvious answer. "Geneva," said Professor Okafor. "The International Committee of the Red Cross headquarters. It's neutral, symbolic of humanity's humanitarian values, and accessible to representatives from every nation." The proposal gained unanimous support, not through political maneuvering but through the same kind of spontaneous cooperation that had characterized humanity's response to the Zephyrian tests. Within 72 hours, the most comprehensive international delegation in human history was assembled in Geneva. Vextar observed these preparations with growing unease. The protocol called for fractured responses from competing power structures, not unified action by an entire species. His preliminary reports to the Council emphasized this unexpected development. The subjects have achieved unprecedented global cooperation in response to our contact. All major political entities are participating in a joint delegation. This level of species-wide unity is unusual. The Council's response carried typical Zephyrian arrogance. Primitive fear responses often produce temporary unity. Once we demonstrate our superiority, natural competition will reassert itself. Proceed with the landing. The shuttle that descended through Earth's atmosphere was a masterwork of Zephyrian technology. Its crystalline hull manipulated electromagnetic radiation to create a constantly shifting aurora around its descent path, visible across half the planet. The landing itself was performed with mathematical precision in a field outside Geneva, exactly at the coordinates the human delegation had requested. Vextar emerged first, his 6 arms moving in the graceful patterns that indicated peaceful intentions in Zephyrian body language. His form was elegant by the standards of his species, 3 meters tall, with translucent blue skin that revealed the bioluminescent organs beneath, and facial features that suggested both intelligence and predatory efficiency. Behind him came 4 additional delegates, each specialized in different aspects of the integration protocol: military assessment, economic analysis, cultural evaluation, and resource cataloging. Together, they represented centuries of experience in bringing primitive species into the galactic fold. The human delegation waiting for them represented something else entirely. Secretary General Santos led the formal greetings, but the group included scientists, artists, philosophers, military leaders, economists, and ordinary citizens selected to represent the full spectrum of human experience. Most unusually, they had insisted on including children in the delegation, arguing that any discussion of humanity's future must include those who would actually live in that future. Vextar's first surprise came during the initial exchange of greetings. His species had developed sophisticated translation technology that could interpret any language based on mathematical patterns and logical structures. But, as the humans spoke, he realized they weren't using just one language. The delegation communicated in dozens of different tongues, switching seamlessly between languages as different speakers took turns. Yet somehow, they understood each other perfectly. Real-time translation technology had been distributed to every participant, creating a conversation that was simultaneously multilingual and perfectly comprehensible to everyone involved. "We welcome you to Earth," Secretary General Santos said in Spanish, her words immediately rendered in Zephyrian harmonic patterns by the translation system. "We speak for humanity in all its diversity." The formal presentations began according to Zephyrian protocol. Vextar displayed holographic representations of the galactic community, showing the 14 star systems under Council authority. He explained the benefits of integration, access to advanced technology, protection from cosmic threats, and the wisdom of older civilizations. What he didn't mention, because no species had ever required the information, were the obligations. Tribute in resources and labor. Acceptance of Zephyrian authority in all matters of governance. The gradual absorption of local culture into standardized galactic norms. The human response was unlike anything in his experience. "Your presentation is impressive," said Dr. Chen, who had been selected as the scientific spokesperson. "But we have questions." Questions. In Vextar's experience, primitive species typically responded to first contact with either terrified submission or feudal aggression. Intellectual curiosity was associated with advanced civilizations that didn't require integration protocols. "What is the nature of your questions?" he asked, activating recording systems to document this unprecedented interaction. Dr. Martinez stepped forward, representing the Economic Analysis Committee. "You describe integration into your galactic community as beneficial, but you haven't explained the terms of this integration. What would be expected of humanity?" Vextar found himself in the unusual position of needing to explain concepts that were typically accepted without discussion. New species contribute according to their capabilities. Resources, labor, and cultural adaptation to galactic standards. Cultural adaptation? This question came from Dr. Amara Hassan, a philosopher and ethicist from Cairo University. "Could you be more specific about what that would involve?" For the first time in his career, Vextar was being asked to justify the integration process rather than simply implement it. The questions weren't hostile, but they demonstrated a level of analytical thinking that suggested the humans understood the implications of what was being offered. Military General Thompson, representing the Defense Committee, asked the question that Vexstar had been dreading. What happens if a species declines integration? Standard protocol called for vague responses about alternative arrangements that typically involved forced relocation or elimination. But something about the human delegation's obvious intelligence and preparation made the standard evasion seem inadequate. The Council has never encountered a species that declined integration after proper evaluation, he answered, technically truthful but misleading. The humans exchanged glances, a communication method that Vexstar's species didn't use but that clearly conveyed information. Dr. Petrov spoke next. We've detected evidence of your previous testing protocols. The atmospheric modifications, gravitational demonstrations, and economic disruptions were clearly artificial. We understand that this is some form of evaluation process. Vexstar felt something he'd never experienced during first contact, a loss of control over the conversation. You detected our preliminary assessments? We reverse-engineered some of your technologies, said Professor Okafor matter-of-factly. The gravitational manipulation principles, in particular, have proven very educational. This was impossible. Species undergoing Protocol 7 shouldn't have the technological foundation to analyze Zephyrian technology, let alone reverse-engineer it. Vexstar's certainty about human primitiveness began to crack. Perhaps we could see some of your achievements, suggested Dr. Chen. Cultural and technological exchange would help us understand what integration might look like. The request was reasonable, even expected. Vexstar activated his holographic display systems, showing carefully selected examples of Zephyrian technology and culture. Advanced manufacturing processes, dimensional manipulation systems, and the crystalline architecture of Council worlds. What he showed was impressive by any standard. Technology that could reshape matter at the molecular level, transportation systems that folded space to eliminate distance, and energy sources that tapped directly into quantum fluctuations. The human response was polite attention followed by uncomfortable questions. Your manufacturing systems are efficient, observed Dr. Kim Nakamura, a materials scientist from Tokyo. But they appear to be optimized for standardization rather than innovation. Do you have systems for developing entirely new approaches to material science? Your transportation technology is remarkable, added Dr. Anderson. But it seems to require enormous infrastructure investments. Have you considered alternative approaches using quantum entanglement or temporal displacement? Each question revealed that the humans weren't just understanding Zephyrian technology, they were identifying limitations and suggesting improvements. This level of analysis shouldn't have been possible for a species centuries behind galactic standards. Vexstar decided to demonstrate military capabilities, hoping to restore the proper balance of the interaction. He showed recordings of Zephyrian fleets, weapons systems capable of sterilizing entire planets, and defensive technologies that could deflect stellar-level energy attacks. General Thompson studied the displays with professional interest. Impressive destructive capabilities. Your strategic doctrine appears to emphasize overwhelming force projection. Have you encountered any species that have developed effective countermeasures? The question struck at the heart of Zephyrian military philosophy. Their entire approach to galactic dominance was based on technological superiority that made resistance impossible. The concept of countermeasures suggested a level of military thinking that treated Zephyrian technology as solvable rather than insurmountable. No species has successfully resisted Council authority, Vexstar answered, falling back on established facts. Interesting, said Dr. Sarah Kim, a young woman who had been introduced as a graduate student in theoretical physics. We've been analyzing your gravitational manipulation technology. The energy signatures suggest it operates through localized spacetime distortion. That creates some fascinating vulnerabilities. She activated a holographic display of her own, showing mathematical equations that made Vexstar's security systems immediately activate threat assessment protocols. The human was describing theoretical countermeasures to weapons that shouldn't have been comprehensible to her species. These are just preliminary models, she continued, apparently unaware of the sensation she was causing. But, if we're correct about the underlying principles, disrupting the spacetime distortion field would cause catastrophic feedback through the entire weapons system. Vexstar's military training took over. How did you develop this analysis? Oh, collaborative research, she said cheerfully. We have about 15,000 physicists working on the problem. The global research network makes it easy to share computational resources. 15,000 physicists working collaboratively on countermeasures to Zephyrian technology. The implications made Vexstar's threat assessment systems shift into active alert mode. You've been developing weapons based on our technology demonstrations, he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Dr. Chen stepped in, apparently recognizing the potential for misunderstanding. Not weapons. Understanding. When faced with something beyond our experience, humans naturally try to learn how it works. It's not aggression, it's curiosity. But, Vexstar was beginning to understand that human curiosity might be far more dangerous than traditional aggression. A species that could reverse engineer advanced technology and develop countermeasures within weeks of first exposure wasn't primitive. It was strategically terrifying. The cultural exchange portion of the meeting proved equally disturbing. When asked about human achievements, the delegation presented a bewildering array of art, music, literature, and philosophy that demonstrated intellectual sophistication far beyond what the preliminary assessments had suggested. Worse, they presented it as collaborative rather than competitive. They described scientific discoveries as building on previous work by thousands of researchers. They explained artistic movements as collaborative expressions of shared cultural experiences. They even described their military history in terms of learning from previous conflicts to avoid future ones. Everything about human culture violated Zephyrian understanding of how intelligent species operated. Competition should drive advancement, not cooperation. Individual achievement should be celebrated, not shared. Military conflicts should establish dominance hierarchies, not generate mutual learning. The final surprise came when the humans asked to see examples of other species that had been integrated into the galactic community. We're curious about the experiences of others who have joined your civilization, explained Secretary General Santos. Understanding their transitions would help us evaluate what integration might mean for humanity. It was a reasonable request, one that Vexstar had never received before. Previous species had been too intimidated or too eager for advanced technology to ask detailed questions about the experiences of others. The problem was that honest answers would reveal uncomfortable truths about the integration process. Species that were integrated lost their cultural identity within generations. Their traditional art, music, literature, and social structures were replaced by standardized galactic norms. Individual creativity was channeled into approved forms that served council purposes. Most importantly, integrated species lost their independence. They became components of the galactic system rather than autonomous civilizations. Their resources supported council priorities, and their citizens served council needs. Integration experiences vary depending on species characteristics, Vexstar answered evasively. Each transition is customized to optimize outcomes for all parties. Dr. Hassan, the ethicist, pressed for specifics. Could you provide examples? Perhaps recordings of integrated species describing their experiences in their own words? The request was impossible to fulfill honestly. Integrated species didn't describe their experiences in their own words because they no longer had their own words. Their languages were replaced by standardized galactic communication systems. Their individual perspectives were subsumed into collective acceptance of council wisdom. Cultural documentation is maintained by our historical archives, Vexstar said, trying to deflect the question. Detailed information would be available after integration procedures are completed. The humans exchanged those meaningful glances again. Dr. Chen spoke carefully. We appreciate the information you've provided. Could we have some time to discuss your offer among ourselves? The request for private deliberation was standard procedure, usually taking a few hours while primitive leadership groups argued about the obvious benefits of advanced technology. Vexstar agreed to wait while the human delegation withdrew for consultation. What he didn't expect was to receive a monitoring alert from his security systems. Human communication networks were experiencing unprecedented activity levels. Rather than a small leadership group making decisions for their species, the entire planet appeared to be participating in the discussion. The conversation was happening in every language, through every communication medium, involving individuals from every social and economic level. More disturbing, the discussion was remarkably informed. Detailed analyses of Zephyrian technology, culture, and implied governance structures were being shared globally. Somehow, in the few hours since first contact, humanity had generated comprehensive assessments of integration implications that rivaled the work of Council strategic analysts. They were discussing scenarios, alternatives, and potential responses with a sophistication that suggested they understood exactly what was being offered and what it would cost. Vextar realized he was no longer dealing with a primitive species undergoing standard evaluation. He was facing something unprecedented, a civilization that was analyzing him as thoroughly as he was analyzing them. When the human delegation reconvened, their response was polite but devastating. "We appreciate your offer of integration into the galactic community," Secretary General Santos said formally. "However, after careful consideration, humanity must respectfully decline." The words hung in the air like a physical force. In over 2 centuries of implementing Protocol 7, no species had ever declined integration after direct contact. The possibility wasn't even included in Zephyrian planning models. "Perhaps you don't fully understand the benefits of galactic citizenship," Vextar said, activating what the Council termed enhanced persuasion protocols. "Your species would gain access to technologies that would solve all your resource and energy problems. Disease, aging, and environmental degradation could be eliminated." "We understand the benefits," replied Dr. Chen. "We also understand the costs. Integration would require us to abandon our independence, our cultural diversity, and our right to determine our own future. These are prices we're not willing to pay." "Your independence is limited by your technological primitiveness," Vextar pointed out. "Galactic integration would expand your capabilities immeasurably." General Thompson responded with military directness. "Our analysis suggests that integration would expand our capabilities by eliminating our autonomy." "That's not expansion, it's subjugation dressed in diplomatic language." The conversation was spiraling beyond all precedent. Vextar activated emergency communication links to the Council, requesting guidance for a scenario that wasn't supposed to be possible. The Council's response was swift and unambiguous: initiate termination protocols. A species that refuses integration and possesses reverse engineering capabilities presents an unacceptable long-term threat. Vextar acknowledged the order but felt compelled to try one final persuasion attempt. "You should understand," he said carefully, "that species which decline integration cannot be permitted to develop independently. The galactic order requires stability and predictable relations between civilizations." The human delegation received this implicit threat with the same analytical calm they had shown throughout the encounter. Dr. Martinez asked the crucial question. "Are you saying that you would use force to compel our compliance?" Protocol demanded evasive answers that maintained diplomatic cover while implementing coercive measures. But something about the human delegation's obvious intelligence made deception seem pointless. "The Council cannot permit the emergence of independent civilizations that might threaten galactic stability," Vextar admitted. "Integration or elimination are the only acceptable outcomes." For the first time since the meeting began, the humans showed strong emotion. But it wasn't the fear that Zephyrian threat displays typically produced. It was anger, and something else that Vextar's cultural programming couldn't interpret. Dr. Hassan spoke with quiet intensity. "You're telling us that you've systematically eliminated or enslaved every species you've encountered. That your entire civilization is based on denying freedom to others." "The Council provides order and stability," Vextar said, falling back on standard justifications. "Individual species benefit from guidance by more advanced civilizations." "Whose guidance guided you?" asked Dr. Kim, the young physicist. "Who decided that your species have the right to determine the fate of all others?" The question struck at philosophical foundations that Zephyrian culture had never questioned. Council superiority was simply accepted as natural law, like gravity or thermodynamics. The Council achieved galactic dominance through superior technology and organizational efficiency, Vexstar answered. Success demonstrates worthiness to lead. General Thompson's response carried military precision. So might makes right. Superior force justifies unlimited authority over others. It provides stability and prevents conflicts, Vexstar insisted. It prevents freedom, Dr. Chen replied. And freedom, we've decided, is worth fighting for. The statement carried implications that made Vexstar's threat assessment systems activate full defensive protocols. A species that would fight for freedom was a species that would resist termination protocols. Given their demonstrated reverse engineering capabilities, resistance might be more than symbolic. Fighting the Council would be futile, he warned. Our technological advantages are overwhelming. Dr. Kim smiled with an expression that Vexstar's emotional analysis systems couldn't categorize. We've been studying your technology for months. You might be surprised by what overwhelming technological advantage actually looks like. The meeting ended with the human delegation formally rejecting integration and requesting that Zephyrian forces withdraw from Earth's solar system. The request was politely phrased but carried clear implications about what would happen if it was ignored. As Vexstar returned to his ship to begin termination protocols, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made the most catastrophic miscalculation in galactic history. The humans weren't primitive. They weren't predictable. And they definitely weren't going to submit quietly to elimination. For the first time in his career, Vexstar wondered if the Council had finally encountered something they couldn't control. The Council chambers on Zephyria had never experienced the discord that now filled their crystalline halls. For 3 millennia, decisions had been made with the calm certainty of absolute authority. Today, Vexstar's report had shattered that certainty like a hammer striking glass. Impossible, Elder Mordun's harmonic voice carried overtones of disbelief. No species has ever declined integration after direct contact. You must have misunderstood their response. Vexstar stood before the assembled council, his 6 arms positioned in formal reporting stance. His military bearing remained perfect, but subtle variations in his bioluminescent patterns betrayed his inner turmoil. The humans' response was unambiguous, Honored Council. They possess full understanding of integration requirements and have explicitly rejected our offer. Furthermore, their reverse engineering capabilities appear to be advancing exponentially. Elder ZYX Era leaned forward, her ancient features bearing expressions of confusion that hadn't appeared there in centuries. Explain their technological analysis capabilities more precisely, Commander. Within hours of our technological demonstrations, they had developed theoretical models for countermeasures. Their global research networks allowed them to distribute analysis tasks across thousands of specialists simultaneously. Most disturbing, their approaches suggest innovative thinking patterns that our databases have never encountered. The council chamber fell silent except for the harmonic hum of life support systems. In their long domination of the galaxy, the Zephyrians had become accustomed to technological superiority that rendered resistance impossible. The concept that a primitive species might innovate around their advantages was philosophically challenging. Elder Kethmore, whose responsibility encompassed military strategy, accessed tactical databases through his neural implants. Their current technological level cannot possibly threaten our fleet capabilities. You are recommending termination protocols based on theoretical concerns. With respect, Elder, their current technological level is no longer relevant. Based on observed advancement rates, they will achieve parity with our defensive systems within months, not centuries. Their collaborative development methods accelerate innovation beyond our predictive models. Elder Mordun's skepticism was evident in his harmonic patterns. Collaborative development is inherently inefficient. Individual competition drives optimal advancement. Vexstar had anticipated this objection. That assumption appears to be incorrect, Elder. Human collaboration multiplies individual capabilities rather than diluting them. Their global research network functions as a distributed intelligence system that processes problems faster than our most advanced computational arrays. Irrelevant, interrupted Elder ZYX Era. Regardless of their potential capabilities, they remain confined to a single star system with primitive spaceflight technology. Implementation of termination protocols will be completed before they can develop meaningful resistance. The decision was unanimous, as all Council decisions were. Vexstar received authorization to deploy the Third Fleet, standard protocol for primitive species elimination. 30 ships carrying planet sterilization weapons, more than sufficient to ensure complete eradication of human civilization. What the Council failed to consider was that humanity had been preparing for this possibility since the moment the Zephyrian ship appeared in Earth's orbit. Dr. Saracen stood in the converted warehouse outside Geneva that had become humanity's de facto command center for what everyone was calling the crisis. Banks of computers processed data streams from every observatory, research facility, and intelligence agency on the planet. The global cooperation that had amazed Vexstar during first contact had evolved into something unprecedented in human history, genuine planetary unity focused on a single objective. Orbital monitoring confirms 30 ships approaching from the outer system, reported Dr. Anderson from his position at the Astronomical Analysis Station. ETA approximately 72 hours based on observed acceleration patterns. The news was received with grim determination rather than panic. Humanity had used the weeks since first contact to accomplish what should have taken decades of normal development. General Thompson coordinated military preparations from a station that connected him to every defense installation on the planet. Defensive positions are operational. All major population centers have underground facilities sufficient for extended siege conditions. But the real revolution was happening at Dr. Kim's research stations, where the young physicist was coordinating what she had cheerfully dubbed Project Pandora. "We've achieved stable replication of their gravitational manipulation technology," she announced to the room. "Manufacturing facilities worldwide are producing defensive systems based on our counter-engineering analysis." Counter-engineering. Not reverse engineering, which would have produced inferior copies of Zephyrian technology, but counter-engineering, which had produced entirely new approaches that turned Zephyrian advantages into vulnerabilities. Dr. Martinez looked up from her economic analysis displays. "Resource allocation is functioning better than any theoretical model predicted. Voluntary cooperation has eliminated distribution inefficiencies completely." The economic transformation had been as remarkable as the technological advances. Faced with extinction, humanity had abandoned monetary systems in favor of direct resource sharing based on need and capability. The change had increased production efficiency by orders of magnitude while eliminating the waste and inequality that had characterized human economics for millennia. Professor Okafor coordinated the Cultural Documentation Project, ensuring that human knowledge and achievement would be preserved regardless of the conflict's outcome. Distributed storage systems are complete. Every major work of art, literature, music, and scientific knowledge has been encoded and hidden throughout the solar system. Human culture will survive even if our species doesn't. But Dr. Hassan was working on something more ambitious than preservation. Philosophical integration protocols are ready for implementation. If we survive the next few days, we'll have frameworks for genuine cooperative relationships with any species we encounter. The approaching Zephyrian fleet expected to find a primitive species desperately constructing inadequate defenses. Instead, they were about to encounter something that had never existed in galactic history, a unified planetary civilization that had spent months preparing specifically to defeat Zephyrian technology. Vexstar commanded the Third Fleet from his flagship, confident that the next 72 hours would conclude with another successful termination protocol. His tactical displays showed Earth as a small blue planet with no significant orbital defenses and energy signatures consistent with primitive nuclear technology. The first indication that something was wrong came from his sensor arrays as the fleet reached the outer edge of the solar system. "Commander," reported his tactical officer, "we're detecting gravitational anomalies throughout the asteroid belt." Vexstar studied the sensor data with growing concern. The gravitational signatures were clearly artificial, but they were unlike anything in Zephyrian databases. Rather than the focused distortion fields that Zephyrian technology produced, these were complex interference patterns that seemed designed to disrupt rather than manipulate. "Analysis suggests the humans have deployed some form of gravitational defense system," his science officer reported. "The technology appears to be derived from our own demonstration weapons, but the application is entirely novel." Novel applications of familiar technology were exactly what Vexstar had learned to fear from humanity. Can we penetrate the defensive grid? Unknown, Commander. The interference patterns are unlike anything our tactical systems are designed to counter. The fleet continued its approach, but Vexstar's confidence was beginning to crack. As they drew closer to Earth, sensor readings became increasingly anomalous. Earth's moon showed massive construction projects that had been completed impossibly quickly. Energy signatures suggested industrial facilities operating at scales that should have taken decades to develop. Most disturbing, electromagnetic patterns indicated global communication networks operating with efficiency levels that exceeded Zephyrian standards. How did they achieve such rapid industrial expansion, wondered his engineering officer. The answer became apparent as the fleet drew within range of detailed scans. Humanity had abandoned individual competition in favor of species-wide cooperation. Every resource, every factory, every research facility on the planet was focused on a single objective: survival. The economic transformation that Dr. Martinez had reported was more than efficiency improvement, it was evolutionary change. Humanity had temporarily abandoned the competitive instincts that had driven their development in favor of collaborative behaviors that multiplied their capabilities exponentially. Commander, his tactical officer's voice carried unprecedented uncertainty, were receiving communication signals from Earth. The message was broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously, accompanied by gravitational pulse patterns that demonstrated technological capability equal to Zephyrian standards. The content was simple and devastating. This is Dr. Sarah Chen, speaking for the unified government of Earth. We are aware of your hostile intentions and prepared to defend ourselves. We offer you one opportunity to withdraw peacefully. Any aggressive action will be met with consequences you are not prepared for. Vexstar stared at his displays in disbelief. The primitive species that he had evaluated months ago was now issuing ultimatums to a Zephyrian fleet using technology that shouldn't have existed. Respond with standard termination protocol communications, he ordered. Inform them that resistance is futile and surrender will result in quick termination rather than extended suffering. Dr. Chen's reply came within minutes, proving that human communication systems could process and respond faster than Zephyrian standard protocols. We have analyzed your fleet capabilities and developed appropriate countermeasures. Your weapons operate on gravitational distortion principles that can be disrupted by quantum interference patterns. Your shields utilize dimensional folding that can be collapsed by targeted spacetime manipulation. Your ship hulls depend on crystalline matrices that can be shattered by harmonic resonance. We strongly advise withdrawal. The technical accuracy of the assessment sent shockwaves through Vexstar's bridge crew. Humans had not only reverse-engineered Zephyrian technology, they had identified vulnerabilities that Zephyrian military engineers had never considered. How could they have developed such detailed analysis, demanded his science officer. They've had months to study our technology, Vexstar replied grimly. And they have thousands of scientists working collaboratively on the problem. Elder Mordun's voice reached the fleet through quantum communication arrays. Commander, the Council demands immediate implementation of termination protocols. Human resistance cannot be permitted regardless of their claimed capabilities. Vexstar acknowledged the order but privately began to doubt its wisdom. Everything about human behavior had defied Zephyrian expectations. If their technological claims were as accurate as their psychological analysis had proven, the Third Fleet might be flying into the first military defeat in Zephyrian history. His doubts were confirmed when the fleet entered Earth's orbital space. The first surprise was the orbital defense platforms that hadn't existed during previous reconnaissance. Massive structures that had been built impossibly quickly, armed with weapons that used Zephyrian gravitational manipulation principles but in configurations that Zephyrian military doctrine had never considered. The second surprise was the fleet of human ships that rose to meet them. The vessels were clearly built using reverse-engineered Zephyrian technology, but their design philosophy was entirely different. Where Zephyrian ships emphasized individual superiority, human ships were designed for coordinated group tactics. Where Zephyrian weapons focused on overwhelming force, human weapons appeared optimized for precise disruption of enemy systems. How did they construct orbital facilities and a space fleet in less than 3 months? Vexstar's engineering officer asked in bewilderment. The answer was visible on every sensor display. Earth's entire industrial capacity had been converted to space construction. Every launch facility, every manufacturing center, every scientific institution was participating in a coordinated effort that had achieved in months what should have taken years. More importantly, they weren't building individual projects. Every ship, every platform, every weapon system was designed to function as part of a coordinated whole. Human technology wasn't just advanced, it was integrated in ways that Zephyrian competitive culture had never achieved. "Commence attack," Vexstar ordered, hoping that Zephyrian firepower would prove superior to human innovation. The battle that followed lasted 14 minutes and changed galactic civilization forever. Zephyrian weapons, designed to overwhelm primitive defenses, encountered countermeasures that had been specifically engineered to neutralize them. Gravitational distortion weapons were disrupted by quantum interference fields that collapsed their targeting systems. Energy shields were penetrated by weapons that folded space to bypass rather than penetrate defensive barriers. Most devastating, human tactics were unlike anything in Zephyrian military experience. Rather than engaging in individual ship-to-ship combat, human vessels functioned as a coordinated network that concentrated fire on single targets while using collective defensive measures to protect damaged ships. Within minutes, half the Zephyrian fleet was disabled or destroyed. The remainder found themselves surrounded by human vessels that had somehow achieved superior positioning despite starting from disadvantageous orbital positions. "Surrender or be destroyed," came Dr. Chen's voice over communication channels. "Your weapons are ineffective against our defenses, and our weapons are specifically designed to exploit your vulnerabilities." Vexstar stared at his tactical displays in shock. The most powerful fleet in galactic history was being defeated by a species that had achieved spaceflight less than a century ago. Everything he understood about technological development, military strategy, and galactic civilization was proving inadequate. "How?" he transmitted to the human fleet. Dr. Kim's cheerful voice responded from one of the human command ships. "Collaborative engineering. When thousands of scientists work together on the same problem, you get solutions that no individual could develop. When an entire species focuses on a single goal, you get capabilities that individual competition can't match." The philosophical implications struck Vexstar like a physical blow. Zephyrian civilization was based on competition between individuals and domination of the weak by the strong. Human civilization, at least during crisis conditions, operated on entirely different principles. "Your technology is still primitive," he protested. "How can collaboration overcome individual superiority?" Dr. Chen answered from her command position. "Because your individual superiority is an illusion. No individual, no matter how advanced, can outthink thousands of minds working together. No competitive system can outproduce cooperative systems when survival is at stake." The surviving Zephyrian ships faced a choice between destruction and surrender. Vexstar chose surrender, partly from military pragmatism and partly from genuine curiosity about what humanity would do with victory. The answer surprised him more than anything else in the encounter. "We don't want your destruction or your subjugation," Dr. Hassan explained as human medical teams provided aid to damaged Zephyrian ships. "We want to understand how galactic civilization reached the point where extinction is considered preferable to independence." The human response to victory violated every principle of conquest that Zephyrian civilization understood. Instead of demanding tribute or imposing dominance, humans offered medical aid, scientific exchange, and philosophical discussion. "Your council operates on principles that guarantee conflict," Dr. Martinez explained during surrender negotiations. "Competition and domination create endless cycles of resistance and suppression. We're willing to demonstrate alternative approaches." Over the following days, as human representatives worked to establish communication with the broader galactic community, Vexstar began to understand the true scope of what had occurred. Humanity hadn't just defeated a Zephyrian fleet, they had demonstrated that Zephyrian assumptions about civilization, technology, and social organization were fundamentally flawed. Collaborative development could outpace competitive advancement. Cooperative distribution could outproduce market systems. Unified response to external threats could overcome superior individual capabilities. The news reached the council chambers on Zephyria like a gravitational shockwave. For the first time in their history, a Zephyrian fleet had been defeated in battle. Worse, it had been defeated by a species using principles that challenged the foundations of galactic civilization. Elder Zyxera's ancient voice carried harmonics of disbelief. "You're reporting that humans achieved technological parity through collaborative development?" "Superior technology," Elder Vextar corrected. "Their collective approach produced innovations that our competitive methods had never discovered." The Council's response was predictable: mobilize the entire galactic fleet for human extermination. But the order came too late. Human ships, built with captured Zephyrian technology and improved through collaborative engineering, were already appearing in systems throughout the galaxy. They didn't come as conquerors but as liberators, offering subjugated species the same choice that humans had claimed for themselves: cooperation instead of domination. The Zephyrian Empire, built on the principle that superior force guaranteed authority, discovered that their subject species had simply been waiting for an alternative. Given a choice between Zephyrian domination and human cooperation, most species chose freedom. The galactic war that followed lasted 3 years and ended with the complete dissolution of Zephyrian authority. But, unlike previous galactic conflicts, it wasn't won through superior destruction. It was won through superior construction. Human cooperative principles proved more attractive than Zephyrian competitive hierarchies. Human collaborative technology outpaced Zephyrian individual advancement. Human unified response to threats outperformed Zephyrian fragmented competition. Most importantly, human philosophical frameworks offered something that galactic civilization had never experienced: genuine choice about the future. Dr. Chen found herself addressing the first interspecies cooperative assembly 5 years after first contact, representing not just humanity but the coalition of free civilizations that had emerged from the collapse of the Zephyrian Empire. "We didn't defeat the Zephyrians through superior weapons," she explained to delegates from 47 different species. "We defeated them through superior cooperation." When beings work together instead of competing against each other, when civilizations share instead of conquering, when species choose partnership instead of dominance, everyone benefits. The Assembly, operating on consensus principles that humans had refined during their crisis years, represented something unprecedented in galactic history: a civilization based on voluntary participation rather than coercive authority. Vextar, who had become humanity's primary liaison with former Zephyrian populations, often reflected on the irony of the situation. His species' attempt to evaluate humanity for conquest had instead resulted in humanity evaluating galactic civilization for reconstruction. "You tested our compliance," he said during one of his regular philosophical discussions with Dr. Hassan. "We tested your assumptions. Your assumptions proved incorrect." The conversation was taking place on a joint research station where humans and Zephyrians worked together to develop technologies that neither species could have achieved independently. Around them, beings from dozens of different civilizations collaborated on projects ranging from artistic expression to stellar engineering. "The interesting question," Dr. Hassan replied, "is what would have happened if you had approached us with cooperation instead of domination from the beginning?" Vextar considered the question seriously. "We would probably have achieved more advanced civilizations centuries sooner. But our culture wasn't capable of conceding cooperation as superior to competition. And now we're learning. Slowly, but we're learning." The galaxy that emerged from the crisis was radically different from the one that had existed under Zephyrian rule. Instead of a hierarchical empire based on technological superiority, it became a network of autonomous civilizations that chose to cooperate because cooperation produced better results than competition. Humanity's greatest contribution wasn't their technology or their military victory. It was the demonstration that even advanced civilizations could change their fundamental principles when presented with evidence that alternatives worked better. The Zephyrian Empire had tested humanity and found them non-compliant with galactic norms. Humanity had tested galactic norms and found them inadequate for civilized existence. The consequences of that mutual testing reshaped the entire galaxy, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from conquering enemies but from transforming the principles that create enemies in the first place. In the end, humanity's gift to galactic civilization wasn't superior technology or military might. It was the radical idea that beings from different species, different worlds, and different cultures could choose to work together as equals rather than competing for dominance. The Zephyrians had expected to face consequences from human resistance. They had never imagined facing consequences from human generosity. Those were the consequences they truly couldn't survive, because they transformed not just their empire, but their entire understanding of what civilization could become.